When an artist makes a brushstroke, I've often wondered, which is more essential? Is it the intention that lives in the mind and the heart of the artist? Or is it the execution? The moment that the brushstroke is made, drawing upon all those subtle techniques to express their intention. And what about authenticity? Does an artist need to live their life according to certain values that they've found to empower a sense of identity or purpose as an artist? When I was 23, I fell in love with image making. I'll never forget that first moment that I felt a camera shutter swing and the thing shook in my hands, telling me that my composition had been captured. I'll never forget it. It made me see the world with new eyes as I began seeing light as more than just a utility for navigating throughout my day. It took on shape, form, meaning. I felt that when I looked through a camera's viewfinder, if I could capture moments or people just right, they became thrilling stories that were frozen in time, capable of revealing truths about themselves, or maybe they could teach me something about humanity. Eventually, I became entirely consumed with the craft and the technique of it, lighting design, composition, film stocks, lens manufacturers, art history, the works of William Eggleston or Ansel Adams or 100 others. I was as inspired as I was inexperienced back then. And eventually, I had my first opportunity to work on a local production, a film production. It was just a small thing, but I immediately knew that I had found my calling. This intense family of collaborative filmmakers who would sacrifice so much to create these fictional moments in time that could be captured and built into a meaningful story. It was much more fulfilling to me than those moments that I spent alone with my camera. I mean, I still love shooting, don't get me wrong. But I felt so drawn to the challenge of filmmaking that I jumped in head first. And I made a series of really terrible short films and experimental documentaries. I shot local TV commercials that were awful. They became better, but but I was in love with the craft of filmmaking. And I focused on learning every new technique I could, working with every new piece of film equipment that I could get my hands on. I became a skilled technician in the craft of cinematography. And along the way, I had successes. I got to shoot bigger projects, feature films. But it took me a while to realize that I had a problem, I was focused, fixated on the tools and the technique, the execution of the thing. And I think in retrospect, it's safer to care more about how you're trying to do something rather than why. I think it's the essence of analysis paralysis, as they call it. The craft of filmmaking is quite different from the artistry and science of a painter's brushstroke, particularly when it comes to cinematography. Instead of bristles filled with paint pigment gliding along a canvas, We have photons of light. And consider the cinematographer standing in front of their canvas, a three-dimensional space, as they seek to wield the elemental properties of these photons of light, to create and shape both light and shadow. By having the crew, they place lighting fixtures or certain types of materials, gels, fabrics. We see here, these are called flags. There's 100 years worth of technology that has gone into enabling a cinematographer to craft an image. And the brushstrokes that we seek to make, they very often require a tedious amount of precision. And unlike painting, it's an intensely collaborative environment. Men and women who are armed with the tools and the experience of crafting an image or creating a moment in time. They possess the hard-won experience of also knowing how an efficient and safe film set ought to run. They could be compared to the muscles in the hand of a painter, wielding the brush. There's a quote from the book. It's called Conversations with Jack Cardiff. He's a famous British cinematographer. And it goes, while it is the job of the director to define the paragraphs, it is the responsibility of the cinematographer to render the sentences. And Mr. Cardiff is a wonderful example of an effective leader, a selfless collaborator, and certainly a bold visionary if you've seen any of his films. And he had the ability to be internally concise, to be intentional in his communication, and ultimately he, like hundreds of other male and female cinematographers, they knew how to create artful, authentic moments within the constraints of a film set, And this is not something that you simply achieve. It's a continuous process. And one that I have found that requires myself to ask deeper, more philosophical questions along the way as I endeavor to become more, dare I say, like Mr. Cardiff. So I've created a framework to help me get there. I call it something quite austere and foreboding, like Ben's tool for decisioning. But anyway, let's take a look at what happens when you make a decision in a collaborative environment. So you have an intention that eventually is communicated or delegated to your crew, which results in the execution. Pretty straightforward. And one night, a couple weeks after I drew pretty much this exact diagram, I took my notebook and I was in the bath. Just random. I was also drinking tequila. I know. And I sat there looking at this thing, and I'm like, okay, intention. What, and it allowed me to ask really helpful questions from a strategy or process point of view. How can I be better? How can I refine my intention? Even before I get to set, before I need to make a decision, how can I arm myself with better tools of communicating a certain intention or thought or something I wanted to achieve, right? I don't know if it was the tequila talking, but there's a very crucial distinction that I found within this process, and I've made it look somewhat like a 1980s geometry textbook, my little diagram. As a decision moves from an internal state to an external state, what exists solely at first within the brain, heart apparatus of the cinematographer or crew leader or manager or whomever, it ends up as marching orders. They are externalized via communication to the crew, calling them into action. Why does this matter? For me, it was a really simple and effective framework that I could use whenever I needed to confidently step within myself and refine my intention. Before having to set the crew in motion, particularly when working in a high-pressure environment you often find on a film set. And things can get pretty chaotic, and it can be tough to lead a crew towards an artistic and meaningful outcome while making highly technical decisions. My head was filled with years of cinematographic tricks and lighting design and, luminance ratios and foot candle fall-off value based on certain types of diffusion material, and just too much or not enough. But this framework, it just gave me confidence to step within myself, to consult all the technical stuff, to think about the meaning of it, to enable myself to more perfectly render the sentences for my director who has entrusted me with the responsibility to do so, for my crew who's trusting me to make the right call, to communicate it the right way so that we can be the most effective. I also found that using this strategy, it enabled me to have those intentions reach deeper into the execution of a thing. They could live longer throughout the process. But there's more. I found an interesting thing started happening as I used this tequila bathtub thing. As I built a deeper connection between the decisions I made and the intentions behind them, the work I produced was more authentic, more true to why I had wanted to create a certain look or style or emotional tone within a film. Authenticity and inspiration, they're two precious elements within the alchemy of any meaningful piece of art. And look, you don't have to be an artist or a filmmaker for these ideas to apply. You could be a sales executive or a nurse, a yoga instructor. I mean, you only need to be a person with an intention for these concepts to apply to you. My simple framework for becoming a better leader and a more capable, authentic artist, it enabled me to start asking deeper questions of myself to help guide my own process. And as you seek to refine your own process for being more effective in your vocation, to be more successful, I think you'll reach a question that I've come to ask myself. And in preparing for my talk, it's one that I've rewritten dozens of times to try to find a more perfect way of asking. How can I cultivate meaningful experiences that I want to have present in my intentions, ones that provide me with authenticity and inspiration? As a leader, as an artist, as a friend, or as a human being, I think they're all connected. Ask yourself this question. Because the truth is, I don't think there's a simple answer. There's no perfect process. There's no perfect brushstroke. I think there's only persistence and hard work after you started asking yourself the right questions. Thank you for listening.